If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, as always, Chris McDaniel, a political reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me today,
Jason Rosenbaum of the St. Louis Beacon.
And Joe Manis with the St. Louis Beacon.
Well, there is a new chair of the Missouri GOP. Ed Martin narrowly defeated David Cole, the incumbent, 34-32, I believe, was what it was.
Yes, right.
In Columbia over the weekend.
It's very stunning. Frankly, it was the first major contest among the Republicans for state party chairman since the early 90s, when there was a battle between Woody Kozad and some other people. But and then he was chairman for several years. So Martin, as we'd mentioned earlier, had forged ties with the Rand Paul activists, some of whom had gotten elected to the state GOP, and some of the other new members, some of the Tea Party-aligned members. The St. Louis Tea Party here had been putting out stuff by either email or Twitter praising Ed before the vote. And it's not unusual for the state committee, for the Republican Party actually to be somewhat not more conservative than the establishment. This happened,
the establishment, endorsed Cole in this. You had Blunt,
right?
You had Kinder, you had the entire congressional delegation.
Right. There was one exception, and the exception is the one that I think some people miss, is State Auditor Tom Schweik, who will be up in 2014. Tom Schweik did not sign the letter for Cole. Now, he didn't come out ahead of time and endorse Martin either, but he and Martin are former law partners, and Schweik's chief of staff, Trish Vincent, who used to be chief of staff to Matt Blunt when he was governor, Trish Vincent got elected VP, which was very interesting and really sent a strong signal that Tom Schweik is going to be, or is least expected to play, a bigger role in the state party.
And they both have ties to John Danforth.
Correct. And Schweik, of course, he's not up till 2014, so he's not involved in all these inaugurations or anything. But the state GOP is supposed to have their Lincoln Days in a few weeks, the big one. And it happens it's going to be here in St. Louis this year.
It will be.
So here, Ed is from here.
Yep.
And in fact, Ed's the first chairman from the city of St. Louis in modern times. He's not the first one from the region. Ann Wagner was chairman for a long time.
Yeah, but he's the first one from the city. As I like to say a bajillion times, he lives 2 blocks away from me in glorious St. Louis Hills.
And so that, in fact, I asked a couple of Republican activists about that. The fact that he was from the city. And they were like, it's probably may have been the Civil War since the last time.
And I do wonder whether the people from the 4th and the 5th senatorial district, which are the St. Louis-based districts, and no Republicans ever run in those districts because they're incredibly Democratic. I wonder if those made the difference in those.
Well, we'll never know because they burned the ballots immediately after the balloting, which is another little interesting tidbit.
Now, I will say this, because I know that Ed Martin's election has caused Democrats and adversaries to Martin to just go crazy with glee.
Yes.
Martin has, I guess, a 2-tiered task ahead of him. One is farther down the road in 2016, the Armageddon election that I like to call, because there's going to be so many things going on.
But he's only elected for 2 years. So,
yes.
Yeah, so 2014.
But 2014, for Republicans, the bar for success for them is not that high. They have to get Schweik reelected, which I think is not automatic in the realm of term limits, but definitely not impossible given the fact that Schweik has been seen as a good fundraiser and is the incumbent. And also, as far as the state legislature goes, the Republicans could hypothetically take more seats in the House. If you look at the map from 2012, they almost won more than 110 seats. And they also have a chance to take 2 state Senate seats, one which is now held by Jolie Justice in kind of mid-Missouri.
Yeah, right.
In mid-Missouri because of a redistricting weirdness.
Correct.
And also One in Jefferson County, which we have talked about in this podcast as becoming increasingly friendly to Republicans.
Yes.
And you could make an argument that when Ed Martin ran in 2010 for Congress, I don't want to give him full credit because I'm sure there were a lot of other things going on, but his performance in Jeffco
was extremely good.
Was so good, it probably helped toward getting a couple of state reps elected. It made the Ryan McKenna reelection, which should have been a 65-35 race. It was like 53-47, much closer than it
Ryan
should have.
McKenna is the state senator down there.
So my point being, if those are the goals, and you also mentioned in your article St. Louis County Executive, which I think is a tougher road to hoe for Republicans because of demographics, but those are not unaccomplishable goals. And I think if the Democrats don't put the amount of work and fundraising and legwork needed to combat all those things, Ed Martin could come back in November in 2014, point to all those things actually happening and say, well, you were laughing at me then, but I'm laughing at you now because I've won all of these things. Now, obviously, as you mentioned in your follow-up article, there are many things that he's done over the years. I don't want to say many, but a bunch of things that have stoked interest and controversy. So I don't want to sweep that under the rug, but I do want to point out that it's very possible he could be chairman, and after 2014, all of those things I just mentioned could go the Republicans' way.
Now, there's also two challenges for him. One that's institutional and one that is more personal. The institutional challenge faces both state parties, and you're increasingly seeing this. Ever since campaign donation limits were tossed out for good in 2008, the money has been flowing directly to the candidates.
Yes.
And so increasingly the state parties aren't getting all the money that they used to get, and they don't have as much control over the pot as they used to get because the money goes to the candidates. Like in the case of the state Democratic Party, it generally goes to the governor, Jay Nixon, and Nixon doles out a little bit to the state party to help pay its bills.
Yeah, which is why all those things that I mentioned, if they all happen, they won't be directly attributable to Ed Martin being chairman because of those things.
But if you look at what happened to David Cole, where he took a lot of the blame for the statewide losses, even though, as Chris and others have pointed out in their pieces, in ours, that Martin was in charge of the state GOP's get out the vote effort. Now, Martin attributes the losses primarily to the fact that he says the Democrats raised so much more money and there wasn't as much independent money going into Missouri on behalf of Republicans, stuff that we've talked about before. But I think that how much control he has or not, he will still, just like Cole, still have to
be responsible.
Yeah, he'll be a target if
Schweik loses, if they don't win those 2 Senate seats, if they lose their supermajority in the House, stuff like that. That'll be the other side of the coin. If it doesn't happen, Martin will probably get the blame.
And then there's another factor or I've talked to some Republicans privately because they didn't want to be saying bad things about Martin in public, but they're saying that one sign will be whether some of the more powerful or influential Republican
donors,
officials,
not
the donors, the
sorry.
officials. If Roy Blunt really ramps up his own independent campaign operation, aside from his own direct one, which is covered by campaign donation limits, but many members of Congress have their own little super PACs, where they get. If he ramps up that, if Ann Wagner, who is a veteran at this kind of stuff and now a member of Congress, if she really, let's say, ramps up an independent fundraising operation on the side, which couldn't be used so much for their own campaigns, but then they can dole out the money to others. In other words, if you start having many Republican power bases among the top Republican officials in Missouri, seen as sort of a counter to the state party, and then that again weakens Martin, that could be a sign, especially if they start doing it early on, which would be a sign that they're not sure they trust him because he has been involved in various controversies. So now Martin says that he's going to be improving the database collection and other technical stuff within the state party and give them an advantage for them to all stick together. But the next few months, while the average person won't notice any of this, but a lot of the insiders will be paying attention to all this, and this could have, again, fallout by the time you get to 2014, because it could affect how much clout, power, and influence the state party has.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the executive director of the Missouri GOP, Lloyd Smith. When I was talking to Ed Martin, he was talking to his staff about finding a new one because Lloyd Smith is interested in Missouri's 8th congressional
one of the
district.
bajillion candidates
Yes.
in that race.
So let's
Not
talk
as many as Jesse Jackson Jr.'s seat, which I think has gotten 17 Democratic
I
candidates.
keep getting like AP alerts about
and not
that,
including my mother-in-law. She has declined to enter that race.
She's yet to throw her hat into the ring.
She will not.
But tonight there is a forum.
Yes, the first of two.
Thursday night,
Yeah.
in case you aren't listening to it.
And there are some developments, I think, in the last
Yes.
couple of weeks. I think the biggest one might have occurred yesterday when now former Senator Jason Crowell of Cape Girardeau officially
State
announced
Senator,
he was going to be in this race. And I had talked with him immediately afterward, after Joanne Emerson, the Republican from Cape Girardeau who's leaving, announced she was going to retire. And he mentioned to me that he was actively thinking about it, which was kind of a surprise because he had told me very directly, and I think he'd been telling other people that he had no interest in ever running for Congress. But now that he's in this contest, it's kind of hard to peg to see where he fits in or how he will do because there's so many candidates. But I do think it is a noteworthy thing that he's in just because he's a former state senator and he's been around for 8 years. And he will have some name recognition in the Cape area. Joe, what do you think his role will be?
Well, I think it could even be a spoiler role. First, we'll go through a couple of the real top major five. Okay, you have Lloyd Smith, who's the executive director of the state party, former chief of staff to Joanne Emerson, and previously to her first husband, the late Bill Emerson, who was the congressman before. Lloyd has a lot of connections. Lloyd's roughly around 60. Emerson is widely believed to be trying to help him get it. However, you also have Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder, who has said he's interested, and he is making a bunch of calls. Then you have former congressman, former state treasurer Wendell Bailey, who has jumped into it. Wendell, who has always been a wild card, and I've known him for a long time, he's putting himself in as someone who could be a placeholder. That if they would pick him, he would promise he wouldn't run in 2014, and that he's saying that his selection would give everybody else time to get real campaigns together.
I would say he's a long shot.
Correct.
At best.
Then you've got several state reps, but two of the more notable ones are Jason Smith and Todd Richardson.
Yes.
Richardson's been getting a lot of buzz. Apparently he's done well in a lot of his campaign visits around the district. Now, the Republican people who will vote in the district, and this is for the nomination, are all the party insiders, but but the number is actually more than I expected. I'm told it's somewhere between 80 and 100 different, because it's all the different townships and stuff. And so they will not vote until after Emerson is officially out, which is in early February. So you've got several weeks of people maneuvering, making calls. We've got this event in Salem Thursday night. Then you have another one in Cape Girardeau about a week later. So a lot of people will be paying attention to this. And what I'm told is that there's several camps. There's the Jason Smith, Todd Richardson, the future camp. These are the younger guys, and if one of them gets in, they could arguably be in it for decades. Right. Then you've got some who are saying, well, if we pick Kinder or Smith or one of the more veterans, then they'll only be in office for maybe 10 years or less, and then you could have somebody else. Crowell is sort of in the middle.
I think he's part of the anti-establishment crowd, which not only includes him, but also includes Sarah Steelman, who I think has also thrown her hat into the ring.
Yes, she has, but I've been hearing she hasn't gained that much traction.
So I would say that because Crowell has kind of chafed against the establishment, his road to the nomination is not as easy as, say, Jason Smith, Todd Richardson, Luke Kinder, or Lloyd Smith.
Right.
But one possible way I think he could possibly do it is if all those candidates kind of split the so-called establishment vote. And I'm just using that as kind of a name for that.
Correct.
And then the so-called anti-establishment Tea Party, more conservative members maybe get momentum around a candidate like Crowell.
The Ed Martin approach.
And then
it worked for him.
I will just say, if that actually happens, that will probably, first of all, Crowell is a very fascinating state legislator, just as the way he was able to use kind of his force of personality.
Yeah, look in the Beacon's archives. Yeah. Jason did a fabulous profile of Crowell a year or two ago.
Yeah, and there are people who filibuster, but there are very few like him that could actually change the course of major legislation basically through himself. And I don't know if he could replicate that in the U.S. House where there's more people, but I think if that happened and he was a congressman, it would be a really interesting thing for a reporter to watch. But to also say any of the other people probably would be interesting to watch. Someone like Kinder going from being lieutenant governor to being a congressman, or someone like Lloyd Smith, who's been there a long time and maybe knows the machinations of Congress, or the two younger people that could be there for a long time and could build up that seniority and become major players. So any of these people I could think could become congressmen that become kind of noticeable within the Missouri camp.
And one sign will be the money raising. Since they're running for Congress, they do have donation limits.
Yeah.
So it'll be intriguing to see how the money starts, where the donor base within the Republican Party starts floating to. And, of course, there's the whole controversy about if it's Kinder, if Kinder would actually end up winning the congressional seat, the whole fight over the governor says, they plan on naming his replacement. They point to precedent, and then you've got some of the Republicans who are claiming no, there would have to be an election, and then there's this effort in the General Assembly to pass a bill, so there's no doubt, which then brings us to our third topic.
Of the Missouri State Legislature, which kicked it off yesterday. Jason, you were there.
I was. There were a lot of flowers and a lot of kind words as I kind of inserted into my
Well, that sounds
story.
happy.
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, the first day of session is always kind of more ceremonial where people get sworn in and people are trying to put as tranquil as a face as they can. It wasn't always like that. I think it might have been after the 2006 election cycle, the first day of session in the Senate, it might have actually been
2005. It was the 2003 and I was there for 2003 when Catherine Hanaway was sworn in as the first woman speaker, and she was also the first Republican in a while. And then in 2005, it got very hostile. Yes.
Yeah, and in 2007, it was definitely contentious too. But, I think I may have said this on this podcast before. It's a different kind of legislature than it was even a few years ago, where it was very much a Democrat-Republican adversarial thing. Now there are so many Republicans in both chambers that the Democrats have kind of this supporting role where sometimes they are important in some issues, but really any conflict is between Republicans.
Yes. And
I think one of the things that I kind of touched on in my venerable 5 things to look for, which I think I've done 60 of so far for the Beacon, is, whether Republicans are going to be able to get along with each other, because we all know in 2011, Joe and I were there way too many times during that special session that, tensions between the Republicans sunk major pieces of legislation.
Yes.
But now that you have new leaders, I don't think Tim Jones of Eureka, the House Speaker, and Pro Tem Tom Dempsey of St. Charles, I don't think they have the exact same agenda, but it's very similar in many respects. And they both have emphasized many times that they both like each other and want to work with each other, which didn't happen with Steve Tilley and Rob Mayer. They were at times very adversarial toward each other. So it'll remain to be seen, how the two chambers work with each other, how Republicans work with each other, how Democrats kind of factor in, especially in the Senate, where they can potentially block things or slow things down. And yesterday was just kind of the kickoff, and I think over the next weeks and months, we'll probably find the definitive answers to all those questions.
Well, and the other thing that Wednesday was this was basically the unveiling of the Republican vision for the state.
Yeah.
With Jones and Dempsey both giving speeches. Jones giving this 45-minute, very lengthy, detailed thing. Dempsey giving the more traditional 10 or 15 minutes. So fast forward to Monday when Governor Nixon and all the other statewides get sworn in, except for Kinder, it's going to be a parade of Democrats. So people are going to be hearing basically the Democratic vision. So it'll be the point counterpoint, and which I don't. Even though the Republicans have been in control of the legislature, I think this one's going to be the more contrasting because there were so many Democratic victories statewide in November. So I think you're going to.
And Nixon's more feisty this time around.
Yes, as you know, which we've mentioned before. He's won a second term, and second-term governors, like second-term presidents, tend to get a little more feisty. But I think you're going to see starkly more defined of their starkly different differences, which will affect policy. And there's going to be this back and forth all month, because he'll be doing the State of the State address in a couple weeks, and the Republicans will be doing their response right afterwards.
Yeah.
So, and since both sides have clout, Republicans control the General Assembly, the governor controls the executive branch, so you're going to have this. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and I guess one other thing, as a footnote before we fade into the sunset for this week, is one thing that the governor did yesterday was appoint Bill Kinney, a former state senator, former Kansas City Chiefs quarterback, Republican, to the Public Service Commission, which is one of, I think, the more important boards and commissions you can be appointed to. And I think if Nixon would have appointed like a sitting state house member to that might have been like a shot across the bow to the legislature. He had already appointed Don Ruzicka to the State Board of Probation and Parole.
Yeah, and he was Republican.
He's a Republican, dropped it to 110
House,
to 109. And I, as I'll probably write soon, Tim Jones was not exactly pleased about that. I think if he would have dropped it to 108, and there is kind of a disputed election in southeast Missouri, that's a whole other ball of wax. I think that would have been a sign that it was really going to get contentious. But I think with Bill Kinney, it was kind of not only is he probably going to get approved, but the other appointee, Steve Stoll of Jefferson County, a Democrat. I mean, I would imagine that logjam is probably going to get resolved because there are two now. So
yeah, and I think that's probably why the governor did it, because Kenny's popular with Republicans. He's also former chief of staff to Kinder, and Kinder and Nixon are not best friends.
They are not besties.
But Kinder was happy about this.
He that was probably one of the first positive statements he's made about a Jay Nixon action in a long time.
And the governor also, the same day, resurrected Zane Yates, a former Republican leader from St. Louis County who's been in private practice for the last 15 years, to the sports authority in the city. Bruce Summer, former St. Louis alderman, he put him on the authority. The former state Democratic Party chairman, Joe Carmichael from Springfield, the governor nominated him to the Missouri State Governing Board. So he was pretty active on that day. Now, all of those require Senate confirmation, so that could be a lively round of Senate considerations. I'm guessing that signals that he figures that all this will be fairly smooth. So we'll see.
Well, if for some strange reason you haven't heard us talk about the Missouri legislature enough, you can tune in to the 9 Network Thursday night, where we will be on Stay Tuned STL, or is it Stay Tuned St. Louis, or just Stay Tuned?
I think it's Stay Tuned, although by the time this is on John Combest tomorrow, I think we'll already been on.
And they can be on the archive. They can go online. But
you can just go to beyondnovember.org and find the archived version. But we'll be on there to talk about the Missouri State Legislature. Rob Koenig from the Beacon will be on to talk about the National Congress. And I think there might be some talk of the St. Louis mayoral race. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll be on TV and dressed up.
Oh, just looking so snazzy. Well,
Jason's promising to wear a tie.
I have at least 30 ties. So I just want to make that clear to the 6 people that listen to this. Oh, did I say 6? I meant 6,000.
Thousands of clicks. All right. Well, we'll be back next week to talk about more political stories. You can find me on Twitter at @CSMcDaniel. You can find Jason.
Jay Rosenbaum.
And Jay Mannies, Mannies.
We're all at beyondnovember.org. That's where you can find the archived version of Stay Tuned. I'm at stlpublicradio.org, and Joe and Jason are at stlbeacon.org. We'll see you again next week.
So long.
Bye.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on The Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.